I'm Matthew Dank, and this is Service and Beyond podcast, where we talk to Australian military veterans about their service stories and their journeys out of uniform and back to civilian life. I'm Matthew Dank, and I served 18 years in the Australian Navy and the Australian Air Force as a helicopter and heavy jet pilot. In 2020, I left the military and started this podcast to chart the journey from defence back to civilian life, and it's my pleasure today to bring you this 5-part series on the Invictus Games. This series charts the journey of current and former Invictus athletes from 4 countries, covering their military careers, their deployment histories, and the injuries they suffered. We talk about their experience of life-changing injury and their remarkable physical and emotional recovery through training and competing in adaptive sports and through the Invictus Games movement. This series also tells the story of the families of these former service personnel, their shared pain and trauma, and the path through hardship, and the bonds and friendships they formed through their involvement with the Invictus Games. Returning from deployment in Afghanistan, Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, watched as the coffin of a Danish soldier was loaded aboard an aircraft for repatriation. That moment had a profound impact on him, and following a visit to the US Warrior Games in 2013, he was inspired to create the International Invictus Games to celebrate the unconquered human spirit and shine a spotlight on these men and women who served. In 2014, the first Invictus Games was held in London, featuring 13 nations, 10 sports, and 400 competitors. Now in 2023, the Games have grown to feature 21 nations and 550 competitors, and thousands of family, supporters, and well-wishers. In 2023, the Games are being held in Germany and in the city of Düsseldorf from 9 to 16 September, with the motto, Home for Respect. This year, Boeing has partnered with the Invictus Games and has the privilege of being the presenting sponsor. This combines Boeing's extensive veteran and military community ties and Boeing's international veterans network with the Invictus Games message of recovery through sports and triumph over injury. Former military members and veterans make up about 15% of the Boeing United States workforce and around 20,000 of the Boeing team worldwide. Boeing sponsors hundreds of programs worldwide supporting veteran-specific employment, career development, and community support programs, as well as transitioning pathway programs to assist veterans when they come out of service and when it's time to hang up the uniform and move beyond their military careers. I myself am a member of the Australian Boeing Veterans Working Group and the Boeing Veterans Network, which connects international Boeing teams and acts as a pathway to learn and compare veteran support activities between countries. So it's my honour to present this series for the 2023 Düsseldorf Games, and I'd like to give a special thank you to the Invictus Games Foundation for helping make this possible, all my guests for the series, and the Boeing Communications team for arranging and coordinating interviews and episodes. I hope you enjoy the series. Okay, let's get into today's episode. So I think there's no better way to start this series on Invictus Games than with David Wiseman's story and his journey with Invictus. David joined the British Army and served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he was wounded in combat while on duty in Afghanistan in 2009, ending his military career. Rebounding from his injury, David took up mountaineering, summiting some of the highest peaks in Europe and the Himalayas, and since leaving the military, David has devoted his professional life and career to supporting the armed forces community. David has served in leadership roles across a range of programs, including the Endeavour Fund, Step Into Health, HeadFit, Kazavac Club, which is a community for Iraq and Afghanistan veterans with shared experience of combat and wounding, Peak State, an organisation he co-founded to improve understanding around mental fitness and empowering people to obtain it, and as an executive member of the organising committee for the inaugural 2014 Invictus Games. David's journey with sport as a recovery medium from injury and trauma has taken him to 3 Invictus Games where he was won a total of 14 medals and where he captained the UK team in 2016. David is now the Director of International Development at the Invictus Games Foundation, where he's played a pivotal role in the organisation of the Düsseldorf Games 2023. David Wiseman, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me, Matt.
Great to have you on, and really proud to have you as the first guest in the Invictus series I'm doing this year for Düsseldorf 2023. And I think your story really highlights the spirit of the Games and, the origin of the Games back to 2014.
Yeah, no, mate, honestly, I'm really, really pleased to be on on the podcast. I think you're doing a fantastic job. I'm really excited. And I just think these podcasts are really important. These internal communications, bring it out there into the community, the international community that's made up of representatives of Boeing. It's absolutely brilliant. I know how much of that community is made up of veterans or people with very close connection to the military, and how much the organisation itself does commercially with professionally with militaries all around the world as well. So I think this is I think this resonates really, really well. And as I say, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Matt.
Yeah, I hope so, David. And it's a pleasure to have you on. And I think before we get into your story, it's a great time just to touch on the spirit around the games and the fact that we're just a few days out from Dusseldorf. How's the feeling within the Invictus Games Foundation?
Everyone is super excited. This is because of what happened with COVID, right? I mean, we were supposed to have the last games, The Hague. They were supposed to run in 2020, but they got pushed back, and and we actually ran them last year. So The Hague did an amazing job with hosting the games in 2022. But what that means is we're pretty compressed now with games in 22 and in 23. It's been hectic, but in a really, really good way. Everyone's super excited about what's coming around the corner. And you know what? It's you want something to do, and you ask a busy man. And so it's as the old phrase goes. We're incredibly busy as an organisation, and the one thing that's sort of coming out at the same time as the games is this incredible documentary that we've been contributing to. It's coming out on Netflix. It's coming out on the 30th of August. I think actually by the time this episode airs, it will already be out there. So as soon as you finish with this podcast, get yourself on Netflix and search for Heart of Invictus. That has, everyone has contributed to that. We're really excited about the launch just before the games, as I say, and all of that just makes it really, really busy. But as I say, in a really good way.
Yeah, sounds like a fantastic series, and I'll be sure to jump across there as soon as it's out. So, before jumping into a bit more detail about the Invictus this year, let's start with your origin story and how you came to join the British Army.
Yeah, absolutely, sure. My dad served as well, so he was a pilot in the RAF. I think he commissioned in 1977, so way back then. And then he was a pilot on the Vulcans, those sort of majestic, iconic sort of V bombers. And then he moved around the Air Force in different sort of capacities. Always in a flying role, always flying, but on different airframes. So I grew up with that sort of influence, and I was really proud of my dad, really proud of his service. And that obviously had an influence on me and my decisions when I came into adulthood. And
you joined up and ended up in the infantry, but how did that go for you from, Sandhurst starting out through to your deployment time?
Yeah, to be honest, I felt like a round peg in a round hole. You know what I mean? I just really felt like this was where I should be. When I was at university, I was part of the University Officer Training Corps. That was sort of my first introduction to the Army. I just loved it, adored it. Sandhurst, 11 months at Sandhurst, again, really, really enjoyed it. I'm not sure you're supposed to enjoy it that much. But I really did. Some of the best mates that I've made in my life, still really, really close to those guys I went through training with. 11 months there at the Royal Military Academy, then sort of 3-4 months specialist to arm training at Brecon. That was a growing-up course. That didn't enjoy that so much. Winter in the Brecon Beacons. With a house on your back, that was pretty grown up. Went into battalion, joined my local line infantry regiment. I'm from York, so our local regiment, the Yorkshire Regiment, and did tours of Iraq I was up in Baghdad. And in Afghanistan, I was down in Nadi Ali in Helmand province.
And your latter deployments where you sustained your injury. Tell me about that engagement. What occurred that day, and what led to your injury?
Yeah, cool. So I was commanding a very small team of Brits. I think there were 9 of us, but we were embedded within the Afghan National Army. We were what was called an operational mentor liaison team, an omelette, and our job was to live, work, and fight alongside our Afghan comrades, and really sort of. I think on paper it was for us to mentor them, but honestly, I got a lot from them as well. You know, it was definitely a two-way street. Their situational awareness, their cultural awareness, their cultural affinity. Even though they were from different ethnic groups, obviously, the ANA recruited from the north, so a lot of them were Uzbeks and Tajiks and Hazari. But the guys with which we were operating were all Pashto, so they were ethnically different, but much closer than Yorkshire. So their ability to sort of have that affinity and that situational awareness was tactically and strategically very, very important for us. Down to they can talk the lingo and or understand it at least, and when people come over and tell you that there's danger or a bomb or whatever, they can pick that up. So it was life-saving at points. So I had 3 companies of ANA, so roughly they're a bit smaller than ours, so roughly sort of about 60 men in each company. So about 180 Afghans, and then my small team of Brits as well. And on the day in question, we, or the ground holding battalion anyway, had just cleared this whole patch of ground. So they'd moved the FLET, the forward line of enemy troops. They pushed that back. If people aren't military, the front line, if you like, the front line had been pushed back about 800 meters. And we were sort of tasked to do some framework patrolling in and around that area over a period of time in order to dominate that ground, stop the enemy re-infiltrating that ground that had been won. And so we were on what was called an advance to contact, a fighting patrol. In a nutshell, we're out to pick a fight. We're out to keep going, move across the ground until we make contact with the enemy, have a scrap, and bully him off that ground. We'd successfully done so. We'd made contact with the enemy. I had a front section over to my front and left of Afghan troops. I was in the middle with my British troops, and then to the rear I had another Afghan group of guys. And it was the front left section that was getting contacted. So rounds were traveling from my forward right across my front to my forward left. So I pushed forward. I was in cover from the contact point over to my forward right. Lots and lots of heavy fire going down, automatic fire. My front group were completely fixed. So I was pulling up a machine gun group to suppress the enemy on my forward right. And as I did so, a second enemy position opened up directly in front of us. I was no longer in cover. And this was, sniper, sharpshooter, whatever you want to call them, but it was single round, right past my head. Didn't move quick enough. I'm a big lad, it takes a while for me to shift. So as I was sort of coming down, the next round came in and hit me just below my clavicle, just below my collarbone. Came in here, but because I was low to the ground, it traveled the length of my torso. So it came in sort of like on that trajectory, came down the length of my torso, hit the back of my ribs, came forward, hit the front of my ribs, rattled around like a pinball, and came to rest in my lung. So yeah, fairly ropey day at the office. I had that you've got an artery running sort of parallel to your clavicle. It's called the crikey, the axial artery. That was it wasn't completely blown apart, but it had a little nick in it. So that was sort of leaking blood pulsing blood into my chest cavity. I had a second chest wound. So when I was taking a breath through my mouth, air was also coming in through the hole in my chest. Obviously that lung collapsed completely. All my ribs, it looked like someone had been at my ribs with a hammer. And I had a brachial plexus injury. Your brachial plexus is a bundle of nerves in your armpit, and that was completely shocked by the force of the round. So everything from my jaw down to my hip on my right hand side was completely just paralyzed, just gone. So I was there, sort of sprawling in the dirt, trying to sort of get on the radio, tell them what was going on, and rounds kept on falling where I was lying. So I managed to crawl into this ditch, which was full of water. And it was at that point I realized I was paralyzed down the right hand side, and I still had sort of 35, 40 kilos on my back. So he sank to the bottom of the ditch. So I'm there, bullet in the chest, hole in the chest, and now I'm drowning. But thankfully, I had some fantastic soldiers around me, and I can't have been that bad an officer, because they came to get me. They didn't just leave me there. And I had two guys cross that killing ground. They crossed that ground where rounds were falling, jumped into this ditch. A Fijian guy called Lance Corporal Fong, an infantryman, and a Ghanaian. So both Commonwealth soldiers. So a Ghanaian, and he was the medic, called Private Ansar. And both of them sort of dashed across that killing area to get to me, and pull me out. And dragged me through the ditch, dragged me into some relative safety. They were on my 2IC was on the radio, sort of calling in, sort of Kazivac. They said, "We can't land a chopper here. It's too noisy. It's too active. The chopper's just going to get shot out the air or brast up on the ground." So they said they're going to have to road move me, which was like, that's not happening, because I'd stopped breathing on the ground. I had what's called a pneumohemothorax, where my chest was filling with air from the second chest wound and blood from the arterial bleed. So my good lung had nowhere to open. So I'd stopped breathing, and so they said, road move isn't an option. Thankfully, US call sign said they dropped down and picked me up. So a Black Hawk circled above, brassed up the enemy, and one landed on. I was chucked in the back and taken to Bastion to get patched up.
Incredible. And the fact that you got through the engagement and then got extracted like that, it was just amazing. Your recovery from there, how did you go on from Camp Bastion? How did your recovery flow on?
Yeah, so it was a long old stint, right? So flown back to Bastion, straight into theatre, straight into the operating theatre. They had to rip out a load of muscle out of my chest. I had a diffia pec minor here. So I got a sort of big old hole there where it should be. They took veins out of my forearm and used it as a bit of plumbing to plumb up the arterial bleed. So sort of life-saving surgery at Bastion, and then a couple of days later flew back to Birmingham, and I was in the ICU. I was in the ICU there for about 7 days. And whilst I was laying there, this guy walks in. Now, I haven't seen this guy for, must be like 5 years. I was at university with this guy. Like I said, I was at the OTC. I was at the University Officer Training Corps. And I was at the OTC with this guy. And really looked up to him, actually. He was sort of a year above me. He was cracking, even at university, you could see he was like just going to be a cracking soldier. He joined the parachute regiment, and his name was Martin Hewitt. And I hadn't seen him for years and years and years. But off his own bat, he'd heard that, a mate of his from uni, had been shot. He'd been shot the year before. Okay, so he'd taken a round almost exactly in the same place that I had. And he was then paralyzed down his right-hand side. He had this brachial plexus injury. Mine got better after surgery. Unfortunately, his hasn't. He's still paralyzed down his right side. But anyway, he came in and had a chat. Had a chat with my mum, which was great. Sort of like calmed her down because my mum was certain I was going to die. And he was like, no, he's going to be all right. I was exactly in this position last year. It's going to be okay. But then sort of we got back in touch, obviously, through this. And Martin started telling me about this expedition he was going on. There was him with, paralyzed down one side, down his right side. There was a guy called Jacco Van Gass, again another Commonwealth soldier from South Africa. He'd lost his arm above the elbow to an RPG, and had extensive leg and internal injuries. There was a guy called Guy Disney, a cavalry officer who'd lost his leg below the knee, again to an RPG, and a guy called Jones. I've forgotten his first name, but he'd got blown up in a vehicle and his back was shattered and he was told he'd never walk again. And these four idiots thought they'd make a great team to go and try and get to the North Pole. And Prince Harry agreed because they told Prince Harry about it and he was like, this sounds brilliant, can I come along? So those five characters went to the North Pole. And I'm there lying in my hospital bed watching these idiots. And I'm like, what the hell? I'm like, this is crazy, right? This is never seen anything, never heard anything like this before. Just the grit, the determination, the refusal to sit down and be defined by their injuries. I was like, wow, like just so inspired, so motivated. I was like, break me off a bit of that. I want a bit of that. So as soon as the next opportunity came along, Martin phoned me up and he was like, Wisey, mate, we've done the pole. We're now going to go to the mountains. Do you want in? I'm like, yes. And he was like, right, well, we're doing some Himalayan stuff. I'm like, whatever it is, I'm in. So I signed up for this thing, and 18 months after being shot in the chest and sort of stopping breathing on a dusty floor in Afghanistan, I'm standing on the summit of the 8th highest mountain in the world. I'm over 8,000 meters. And I just couldn't believe it. It was just incredible. And I realized, that trip, and all the training with it, was life affirming. It was just life affirming for me. And everything that I'd seen those guys do, I was now doing it. I was affirming my life. I was living beyond injury. I was proving to myself and others that I can still do stuff after living through this adversity, living through this trauma. And that was a pivotal point for me. And I realized that when Martin had come in to the ICU, he'd brought a bottle of something. He'd bottled it and passed it on to me. And I was like, it's almost my duty to pass it on to other people. Serendipitously, I left the army in 2013. So those climbs were in 2011, 2012. I left the army a year later. I was invited to apply for a job at the Royal Foundation of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and Prince Harry, as it was then. And I took the job, and it was essentially to start up and develop a program, a grants program, to support the ambitions of wounded, injured, and sick service personnel and veterans to use sport and adventurous challenge as part of their recovery. It's a good fit, right? So that's sort of what I'd just done. So I was like, cool, I can do that. And I'm really motivated. I'm really, really want to do this. And I can see how it would be done. That was called the Endeavour Fund. And I left the army on the 1st of May, 2013, started this job with the Endeavour Fund, which lasted for years and years and years and years, and has now been transferred across to the Invictus Games Foundation. It's great. More about that later. But 1st of May 2013, I've left the army. I think 15th of May 2013, I'm joining Prince Harry on his US tour, and we are in Colorado. We'd heard about this incredible event called the Warrior Games, and we went over to look at it and to visit it and honor it. And it was the US Army versus the Navy versus the Air Force versus the Coast Guard versus Special Ops Group, and they'd invited the Brits over as well as a guest team as well. But it was sort of behind the wire. It was apart from the Brits, it wasn't international. No one really knew about it. It wasn't on TV. It wasn't advertised. It was very much a sort of a military event, right? But it was incredible. And what we could see on that field of play was just like, this is awesome. This is so cool. Wounded guys against wounded guys, and it's about engaging in sport. It's about living beyond injury, etc. Like, this is awesome. And we sat down at breakfast the next day, and Harry said, he said, this is awesome. He says, let's take this idea and let's internationalize it. Let's put it in the Olympic Stadium. Let's put it on TV. Everyone should hear about this. This shouldn't be behind the wire. This should be for everybody. Wow. Yeah, I can see it. This is going to be huge. And that was May 2013, right? That was concept. So you talk about a flash to bang. Concept was, I think, as I say, 15th or 16th of May 2013. September 2014, we had 13 nations. We had 500 competitors. We had sort of 1,000 friends and families. We had tens of thousands of spectators into the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in London. We had hours of coverage on the BBC every day. We had a huge sort of military tattoo-esque opening ceremony with God knows how many members of the royal family there. We had a massive closing ceremony. Everyone who was anyone at the time was playing at this closing ceremony. We had the blooming Foo Fighters close the closing ceremony. They hadn't played in the UK for 10 years, but they came over for this. It was enormous. It was huge. And we put all that together from, as I say, May 2013, September 2014.
What an incredible achievement to knock off in just under 18 months. You must have pulled in some huge favours from across contacts and across Prince Harry's network in the UK.
The cool thing was we got a lot of good sort of leadership and guidance. It had just been, if you remember, it had just been the Olympics, London 2012, which, it was a cracking Olympic Games, right? It was a cracking Games. And it was the first time in Olympic history that the Paralympic Games had sold out to capacity. And we were really proud of that here in the UK. And we were really proud of the fact that actually the Paralympic Games got a huge amount of coverage. almost equal to the Olympic Games. The Paralympic Games was parallel. It was seen as that in this country, and that opened a lot of people's eyes to the world of adaptive sport. And so we were definitely riding on the coattails of the Paralympics in 2012. There was an atmosphere, there was a culture, it was a culturally rich sort of bed that we fell onto of, adaptive sport is cool. Of course we're open to this idea of the Invictus Games. So we were very fortunate in terms of the timeliness of that. And also the facilities, the infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when we were sort of like knocking on doors to, London, the council, for example, the mayor's office, and say, can we have that for free? We were sort of knocking on an open door because it was seen as sort of legacy aspect. The time was right. The execution was right. That's where it started.
And that was 2014 London Games. You shortly followed up with a key role as a competitor and as the captain of the English team in 2016.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was really fortunate enough to be selected as the team captain for the UK in 2016. So the games then moved to Orlando in Florida in the US. And I'm a swimmer. Always loved being in the water. Very much is sort of my place of peace, to be honest. It's my happy place. Coming back from Afghan, I had a very sort of busy mind, a very noisy mind, and it was very hard to sort of find any kind of peace. But actually, in the swimming pool, I am a pool swimmer. Everyone thinks, oh yeah, open water. No, swimming pool for me every time. I like a shower at the end. But, it's sort of, people say it's boring. I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm after. I've got this busy, crazy mind. And the idea that, the sound is completely muffled because my ears are under the water. The idea that the sound is muffled because my ears are underwater. The idea that all I can see are tiles moving under my nose. The idea that I'm counting my breaths, I'm counting my strokes, I'm counting my lengths. Nothing can, I'm not clever enough that anything else can go on in my head. So it becomes almost meditative. Your breathing is controlled. Again, I'm not clever enough to breathe underwater. So, you've got to control that breathing. It becomes a meditative experience for me. So the idea that then I could compete in something that I find so restorative, again, it just played to the strengths of that idea of sports recovery.
And this was of course 6 years after your injury in combat, but prior to that, many years before, you'd done your trekking, Himalayas, the Italian Alps. What were your injuries that were ongoing after your recovery, and how did you deal with them?
A lot of it is sort of nerve injury now. A lot of sort of pain and down into my hand. Actually, it's the hand where I feel the most pain and weird sensations, all down to that nerve injury with the brachial plexus. So a lot of weird stuff goes on down into my hand. So it's a bit weird, isn't it? You sort of get shot in the chest, but your hand is affected. That's where I get the ongoing issues. I do get a lot of chest infections. I sort of get like 2 or 3 chest infections a year, and quite a bit of chest pain as well. I've got some gross scarring all around my pleura, and every now and again my lung sticks to that scarring, and then ripping it off. There's actually no nerves in your lung. There's a lot of nerves in your pleura, so ripping the lung off the pleura feels like ripping a scab off your lung.
David, we were talking off air about the 3 pillars of well-being that any major injury is going to impact, be it psychological or physical. Could you take us through those 3?
Right. There's so much evidence and theory behind why sport is great as part of recovery. I sort of break it down into three sort of areas. If you think any injury or significant illness, it doesn't matter what it is, and it doesn't matter how you sustain it. You could have been blown up in Afghanistan. You could have been set on fire in Basra. You could have, broken your leg playing rugby. Okay, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how it was sustained. There will always be a physical, a social, and a psychological reaction and impact to that injury or significant illness. Let's take that rugby injury, okay? Because everyone's had an injury on the sport field or something like that. You've twisted your knee, it hurts, you're debilitated, you can't get around so much. Perhaps you lose some fitness, you lose some strength, etc., etc. You're out of the game for sort of like the season, right? Even if it's a good fix, and you can come back next year, but you lose all these sort of aspects of your physicality. In terms of social, you're no longer going to training, 2-3 times a week or whatever, and you're not having that match at the weekend. Okay, so you're not having that engagement. You're not having that social status of being part of a team, of going out onto the field, etc., etc. Psychologically, you've lost that thing which you're looking forward to, which adds structure to your week, which is part of one of your, or several of your goals, which sort of break up your time, your milestones of your time. You go, okay, well, actually, no, I've got this week, that then, and then we go to that tournament and I need to train for that. You've got milestones which break up the time, and you lose all of those. You've been injured, so you're sitting at home, and what are you doing? You're sitting there with a can of cider watching Trisha, and it's like, brilliant. That's rubbish. So your self-esteem goes down. What you enjoy, you lose the thing that you enjoy doing. You lose maybe some touch points with your mates, and you can feel yourself getting a bit weaker or a bit slower, etc., etc. It's not good, right? You put in sport into any of those injuries, any of those illnesses. Doesn't matter what kind of level it is. You don't have to be climbing the 8th highest mountain. You don't have to be, swimming at an international games. You don't have to be. Okay, it's just engaging with sport. If you're engaged in sport, you're going to be more physically active. If you're more physically active, then you've got all your good juices flowing around your body. You've got your blood flow, your heart and lungs are working, etc. Whatever your injury or illness is, as long as you're not aggravating that injury or illness, obviously through the sport, then you're getting healthier, right? A healthy body is going to heal quicker. So physically, it's going to improve that impact. Socially, again, it just forces you out the door. If you've got a significant injury or illness, perhaps some trauma linked to that, you're less likely to want to leave the house because it's harder. It's harder to get out of the house when you've got a bloody cast on your leg or you're carrying trauma or whatever. It's just harder to get out of the house. But this forces you out. Actually, I've got training. I don't want to let the guys down. I've got something coming up, so I need to train for it. It gets you out of the house and it gets you engaging with individuals in a mutually supportive environment. Okay, where you count for something, where you are required, you're a member of a team. Okay, so you've got that social interaction, that social status. And psychologically, well, like I was sort of saying before, it gives you those milestones to break down your time. Well, I've got training here, I've got training there, I've got a game there. Bang, bang, bang. Okay, that's my week. And it's a positive thing. It's a positive goal. Sport is always going to be positive. Win or lose. Okay, win or lose. You're always moving forward. You're always training. You're always getting better. Okay, you're always trying to reduce that time or score more goals or whatever. It's always that positive trend, or should be. Even if the goal is just to have a bloody good time, okay, it's you're striving towards it. And more importantly, and especially for me, okay, like I was one of these infantry geeks, okay, like I loved it, okay, so I lived it, cut me open, bleed green, that sort of guy. Absolutely, completely and utterly defined by my profession. I was an infantryman, okay. I was sure there were other people in the military, but if you weren't in the infantry, then it didn't matter. You know what I mean? You were just there supporting the infantry goal. I was one of those obnoxious infantrymen. But I was completely defined by what I did. And when that was taken away from me through injury, I was like, well, what am I now? And I started to define myself both in a negative fashion and in a rearward fashion. So I was a wounded soldier. Service is something I used to do. I was an injured soldier. I was a broken soldier. It's a negative and rearward facing definition. But as soon as I started climbing mountains, well, hang on a minute, I've just climbed above 8,000 meters. I'm a high altitude mountaineer. As soon as I start swimming at Invictus, hang on a minute, I'm swimming on an international stage. I'm an athlete. These are incredible, defining points that you can start building that sense of identity. And again, doesn't have to be a high mountain, doesn't have to be at an international level, doesn't have to be at an elite level, doesn't have to be anything. Okay, if you're going down and playing village cricket, you're still a cricketer. It's what you do. And that rebuilding of identity on something which is in the present and something which is positive is hugely important for your recovery.
It's funny you mentioned identity. That's one of the key themes, certainly veterans in Australia, loss of identity, those forced out of service by injury, such as your case. So such a cause and such a movement to be involved in sport, and Invictus is obviously taking that to the international level. You've been involved since 2013. Tell me about your role now as Director of International Development and the mission to bring on more nations and to spread the message beyond perhaps the traditional, Western military countries.
I've had so many different roles within sort of the Invictus Games and Invictus Games Foundation, etc. Whether that's part of the executive for the taking it from concept to delivery, whether that was as a competitor, as a team captain. I joined the charitable side of the Invictus Games, the Invictus Games Foundation. They're really sort of the guys that sort of pull all this together. And I joined the team here at the Invictus Games Foundation back in 2019. I was, at the time, the entire focus was pretty much on the games itself. I mean, the games are fantastic, right? And remain the epitome of what we do. And at the time, that was the entire focus of the foundation. I came along originally as the director of grants and programs, and with the sort of mission of expanding the offer that the Invictus Games Foundation has beyond the games. So we developed a number of different projects and programs to offer different engagement points for a wider and larger group of participation and engagement across different sports recovery activities. So I talked about the Endeavour Fund before and how that was pulled across to the Invictus Games Foundation. That happened in 2019, and that is still absolutely rocking today in terms of offering grants around the world to wounded, injured, sick, service personnel and veterans that wish to use sport and adventurous challenge as part of their recovery and onward rehabilitation. So over the years, we've supported some absolutely crazy, fantastic, different sporting adventures and expeditions all around the world. And it's very, very cool. We support sort of domestic projects. So I'm trying to think of one that was in Oz for you guys. So we supported a group of guys that wanted to do one of those Tough Mudder things. So, they wanted a small grant of, a couple of grand to get a team together, a large team, a couple of grand's worth to go and do one of these Tough Mudder things. And they trained for it and did Tough Mudder. And it's great. So it could be a small thing like that. Or we've got guys at the minute who are kayaking sort of the west coast of Alaska Do you know what I mean? Like, so it can be either end of the craziness spectrum, an adventurous spectrum. We pull guys in from different countries. So we pull together international teams, to really sort of build those international bonds between different countries. And they're also great. I was out with a team in Morocco last year, and I think there were sort of 6 or 7 different nationalities, 20 guys on that across 6 or 7 countries. And we climbed the highest mountain in North Africa together in Morocco. It was cool. So that's that sort of endeavors. We've got an incredible online platform called We Are Invictus. That's like a closed social network. We've got thousands and thousands of guys from across the world who can use that as a safe space to communicate with each other, away from sort of Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and all that sort of nonsense. This is a safe space which is purely for this community. And we've got an incredible conference and information sharing seminar program called The Conversation. And again, there we pull together people from around the world to share their experiences, and we can share best practice. So that's what I did originally. I sort of pulling together that offer of Beyond the Games.
So now that your focus is international development, what are the key things you're going after for getting more nations involved in the Invictus movement?
But when we set out, so in my role now, when we set out in 2013-14, really sort of it was whilst those post 9/11 conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan were either still going or still current news and or recent experience. So it was natural at the time to invite those nations that had allied in those and lost guys and suffered casualties in those conflicts. So that was sort of our group, if you like, our community. But as time has progressed, what we've noticed is, thankfully, we're no longer losing guys or suffering casualties in the same numbers in Iraq and Afghanistan as we were back then. And so the population, the demographic of our participants has changed and is changing. We're all getting a lot older, right? No one wants to see me in my Speedos anymore. It's been a few years, and so that time has passed. And hopefully, the community of which I was part of and still am part of, has had that time to recover and rehabilitate from their injuries. I don't know if you've watched the news anytime recently, but there's a lot of conflict going on in the world still. And so what we have got is we've got something really, really special in terms of this message, in terms of this process of sports recovery on an international field. And so we want to invite new nations into the community. And my job now is to slowly, and it is a slow process, we're not just opening the floodgates and everyone come in because we'll just get overwhelmed, to slowly sort of bring in new nations into the Invictus community of nations. And that's what I'm doing now. Last year we welcomed Israel, Nigeria, and Colombia.
Excellent. And I understand this is the biggest turnout to date, 22 nations for Dusseldorf kicking off in just a few weeks.
Absolutely. And we are so excited about Dusseldorf in a few weeks. We're really, really pleased. Obviously, this is why we're talking today. Really, really pleased to have Boeing as part of the family on board. The support that Boeing has offered. It basically everything that I've talked about today about sports recovery, rehabilitation, the ability to inspire others to reach out across other nations. We couldn't do that without the support of our supporters. So it's a huge thanks to Boeing for seeing that, for seeing what we do, for your support, and for today as well, for this conversation. For giving me the time on this platform to talk about what we do.
I think it's a tremendous opportunity for Boeing to be involved and really connect our veterans' initiatives and causes to what Invictus is doing. Boeing in Australia, at least, has got about 20% of our people across the company being veterans from all three services in Australia, and we're very active in the US, UK, India, and soon to be Japan on the veterans front. So I think there's some great alignment between missions, and I think it's a really great match.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and everything that you guys do across your veterans network, they're so important because, we spoke previously sort of about transition. Matt, you and I, we're a weird breed, right? We sort of like, as a veteran, you do come out and you've got a strange perspective of the world. You talk a funny language, and you've maybe done things in your 20s that other sort of people in their 20s can't relate to, just because of the situations we've been put in, the environments in which we found ourselves. So actually, to have a veterans network like the one that you're so heavily involved in is really important, because it's us that have got to change, not the civilian world. We're moving into the civilian world, so we need to change. And actually, to have a group like the one that you're involved in so heavily, to help guide others through that transition process, and help people see from that perspective, is really important and really beneficial for them as individuals, and for the wider organization into which they are joining.
Yeah, honestly, I couldn't agree more, David. And I think we are extremely lucky to have a great talent pool of committed and very hardworking people supporting our veterans movements in Australia within Boeing. And honestly, beyond Boeing, in the Australian community, we have great support, which has really arisen in a similar time frame for the Invictus Games, going back to the 2010 to 2012 era with some of our community-based organisations. So it is really encouraging and great to see the amount of support that's out there now in Australia. And I think through Invictus, we can start to spread that message and bring that to some of the nations that haven't experienced the same amount of support and the same amount of government and community action on the veterans front. David, I do want to switch gears and touch on a topic that I know is close to your heart, and it's something that's just starting to come to public awareness but isn't as well understood as mental illness, if you like, or PTSD, depression, anxiety, those sorts of major ailments, and that's the concept of mental fitness.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, the way to think of it is, if you think about health, okay, you think about the spectrum of health, and you think about sort of good health and you think about bad health. If you think of a spectrum of being sort of the promotion of good health, the prevention of ill health, the detection of a condition, and then the treatment. You think about those sort of four things: promote, prevent, detect, and treat. I think that we, as a society, and certainly we as a military as well, I know over here in the UK, I'm sure it's the same in Oz, we've got a lot better. We've got a lot better at the treat and the detect. The conversation has evolved to actually, it's less taboo to discuss stuff about mental health, but we are still very much stuck. The conversation is still very much stuck on that right-hand edge, right? That sort of, we're going to talk about mental health. Oh, right, cool. So we're talking about depression, anxiety, and trauma, right? And no, health. If we thought about physical health in the same fashion, the conversation about physical health would only ever be about cancer, diabetes, and breaking your leg. Okay, but it's not, is it? We talk about loads of stuff about physical health. And a lot of it is about the promotion of good health. It's about exercise, it's about diet, it's about nutrition, it's about rest, it's about sleep. It's about all those things that help us be healthier and promote good health. And that's really the conversation that we're trying to open up with regards to mental fitness. So that's what we talk about. We talk about mental fitness because if you say mental health, obviously that takes people down a different rabbit hole. So we talk about mental fitness, the things that you can do every single day in order to be the best version of you. And this doesn't have to be sort of sitting in a cross-legged position, fingers on thumbs and meditating. It doesn't have to be that. It can be that. That's great. It can be that. But there are things that you can do every single day to help unlock potential, increase your performance, and improve your well-being.
Excellent. And how can people get in touch with you, firstly, if they want to follow up your work with Invictus or otherwise? What's the best way to get in touch?
You can get hold of me on, or X, as it's known now. I don't know. Feels a bit dodgy saying that. You can find me on X. Let's just go to Twitter. I'm at Wise Show, all one word. So, you can find me on there if you want to get in touch with me in particular.
Thank you very much. And I think the Invictus YouTube channel is invictusgames23.de, which is a German page, but mostly in English. And at Invictus Games Dusseldorf 2023. So, looking forward to hearing about the games, the competitions, and most of all, the camaraderie.
It's going to be great, Matt. It's going to be absolutely great. And I know quite a few guys from the Boeing team are coming over. Very much looking forward to meeting them and welcoming them in Germany.
Well, David, thank you for your time today. It's great to hear, I think, your journey from the start, Army career, your injury and recovery, and just the role of sports that's led to where you are now. And, of course, your work with Invictus throughout the years. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks very much. And thanks again for all the support that Boeing are offering and giving. It means that we can do everything that we've talked about today, sports recovery and inspiring others.
Okay, that's episode 1 of the Invictus Games series complete with David Wiseman. You can catch the series Heart of Invictus, as mentioned by David, on Netflix. It premiered on 30 August and is now available. I hope you can join me for the next episode 2 of the series, with Keontae Story, former US Marine and track star in the USA team competing this year in Dusseldorf. Take care and see you then.